Let's talk Debo now. He did request the trade, and the Niners have given him their blessing to for him and his agent to go seek out a trade, almost daring him to go find a trade partner. He was wearing an Eagles jersey during Super Bowl week, showed that he had a boiler. Then he did a
Yeah, no
FaceTime
kidding.
celebration with AJ Brown. Maybe he wants to be an Eagle. And then he was pictured, he put on his private story a picture of himself in a Broncos uniform saying how tough that looked. And so maybe he wants to go to Denver. That's kind of an interesting one. And then PFF in their first mock draft post Super Bowl 59 had the Niners trading Debo in the 11th pick to Jacksonville to move up for the 5th pick to take Mason Graham from Michigan. That's kind of interesting. The odds are out. Jimmy Shapiro sent me odds today on Debo, and Washington's a 3-1 favorite to land him. Chargers are second at 4-1. Carolina's third at 5-1. Denver's fourth at 6-1. New England's fifth at 7-1. Pittsburgh's sixth at 8-1. Vegas Raiders are 10-1. Rams are 12, and Dallas is 16-1. So, the Debo thing is really interesting. I don't, you know, on one hand, I think he's done. I did a video about a month ago about all the different run through you players in NFL history. And they all are done by 28, 29. Only John Riggins was like the only guy who ran through people that really lasted until his mid 30s. Everybody else is pretty much done at 27, 28, 29, 30. By 30, almost all those guys are all done. Everybody who runs through people. And that's what Debo does. He runs through people. So on one hand, I think he's done. On the and the numbers this year show he's done. He averaged 3 yards a carry as a runner. He had the same number of receiving touchdowns as Juszczyk. He's basically just a non-factor. So he looked done, and history tells you he's done. But you know what? He's such a one of one in that there's not a lot of guys like him. He's very unique. So if you do happen to be in love with what he brings to the table, I could see a team overspending to get him because, as I said, he's a one of one. There's not anybody really like him. So I personally think that he's not worth more than a 5th or 6th round pick. But I think there's a chance that somebody overpays, just thinking the Niners' offensive line is horse S, and our offensive line's way better. And if we get him out of San Francisco, he'll be better here. Maybe people that saw him in like the Miami game and think, oh, you know what, he looked good in that game. Maybe there's somebody out there that's like, hey, you know what, he's a gadget player, but man, we really love this gadget player. We've been dreaming of this player, and there's really nobody who's come down the pike who's very much like Debo. There's a couple guys, but they're not really like Debo. So maybe somebody will give you a better pick than you think, but maybe I'm thinking the best chance of getting value for Debo is if you group Debo with some pick for a player or trade Debo for another player, something where you really couldn't really discern exactly what the value was. Because I think if it's just Debo for a pick, I don't think anybody's going to give you a day 2 pick. I think
Yeah.
it's a day 3 pick exclusively, and maybe a late day 3 pick. Might be a 6th round pick.
Yeah. Well, I think
Especially with that contract.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said is right because there's not as it's a supply and demand league, and although it's not like quarterback, lots of receivers come into the league, and that's why I didn't love the Ayuk deal because you get 8 or 10 receivers coming in every single year, and a lot of teams aren't going to give anything up. But if you look at this year, teams who need a number 2 for one reason or another, I wrote a piece on this, but the Bills need a receiver, the Patriots do, the Ravens do, the Bengals, if T. Higgins leaves, they're going to need somebody. The Steelers still do, the Texans do because they hate Stephon Diggs and he's leaving, and Tank Dell ripped everything he could possibly rip. So now they have Nico Collins, and that's it. The Chiefs we just saw do, the Raiders, as you said, the Chargers, the Cowboys, the Commanders, the Falcons, the Seahawks. That, by the way, I was talking to some friends in Seattle. Tyler Lockett's probably played his last snap there, and they're talking about trading DK Metcalf because they think that the market is going to be so good in this offseason that they can get a lot for DK, and they have Smith and Jigba. So I think there's a lot of teams. I think it comes down to the Texans because they need it. They want to win now, and D'Amico's there. You got to connect the dots of who you know. Commanders because Adam Peters was the VP of player personnel when Deebo was drafted. They need someone opposite McLaurin. The Steelers still have not gotten anybody. They had so much dialogue with the Steelers until Kyle ran up the stairs, and he should have traded Ayuk, but they didn't. Just stick Deebo in those conversations. They've got a lot that they've talked about. Harbaugh would love a tough guy like Deebo, and they could figure out things for him, and they just have Ladd McConkey. Quentin Johnston's been terrible. And the Patriots are so desperate for receivers for Drake May that, like you and I were saying before the show, I really think that they could actually offer something Deebo wouldn't even be thinking about, which is an extension. I think that he'd go, I'm not going to New England, just Ayuk, like Ayuk did, but they've got a ton. They have the most money in the league and a desperate need. They could overpay for Deebo, and they could give Deebo an extension because I'm not sure anybody's going to want Deebo at the cap number he's making at 15.1. That's top 10 this year. That's not AAV. That's different average annual value, which is at 23.8. He's at over $15 million for what he does. And I think what a team's going to do is they're going to trade for him. And I think you're right. It's going to be a conditional 4 or 5 with performance. Can be a 3. I think that's the max they can get. And then they're going to sit back, and it's going to be a post June 1, not to get all geeky in numbers. If they were to do a pre June 1 cutter trade, it's 15 million that they're going to take a hit on. If they do post June 1, which is what they're already doing with Hargrave, then they're going to be down about $5 million, and they'll get a pick back, and that'll be worth it. So look, it was funny to me when he said that, because he's like, well, I want to get traded. And the Niners are thinking to themselves, we want to trade you or cut you, whatever. You're leaving either way. Like, I don't know if his representative said, it'll look sexier if you say you want to be, if you want the trade and you initiate it versus you getting cut. Because, we all have that. What's that like? For some reason, you're more desirable when you have a job. You're more desirable when you have a girlfriend or a wife. You walk down the street as a single guy, you smell desperate to women. So the fact that Deebo is asking for the trade, that's actually a ploy by his agents to say you want to trade, because they're going to cut or release you. And that there's just a perception with that, and you lose value. So I think that the Niners will be able to do that. And just because of the names we just mentioned and you mentioned, it's actually a good year, better than it was last year with all those good receivers coming in the draft. It's just not that kind of a draft this year. So I think that the 49ers will actually get a little bit better value than they would have, say, a year ago had they tried to move Deebo.
It's going to be interesting. The odds on Deebo's next home, Washington's 3-1. So the favored choice is that he's going to join.
Would you care to move into the NFC? I mean,
no,
let's say the Commanders, because
don't care.
You could see the Commanders in the playoffs next year. They're going to be there for a while. The Niners with the bad schedule and bringing in Saleh and getting general health, the Niners are going to be a playoff team next year. You could see the Commanders. Does that matter to you?
No. I'm going to get the best deal I can get, and that's it. But, they're favored, so maybe he goes and plays with Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury. The Chargers are the second choice at 4-1. They desperately need a receiver. Panthers
are there.
5-1. He's from South Carolina, so North Carolina, would make a lot of sense. Broncos at 6-1. Pats at 7-1. They round out the top 5. Then there's the Steelers at 8-1. They wanted him last year. Raiders at 10-1. Rams at 12. Cowboys at 16.
I think Steelers, Texans, and Commanders. I think that with Adam Peters there, I think with the Texans and D'Amico, and they are absolutely desperate. And Pittsburgh never got a receiver. And George Pickens is their number 1 receiver, and he's a complete head case. And I don't know who their quarterback's going to be, but that's a good team. Like defensively, TJ Watt sitting there going, could you get me any offense? Any offense? Because they have a good offensive line. I don't know what they're going to do at quarterback, but George Pickens isn't going to get it done. He's way too inconsistent. Freiermuth is a decent tight end, but they don't have anything from a receiver standpoint, and they had so much dialogue with the 49ers last year for Ayuk. Why not just pick it up and stick Deebo's name in there instead of Ayuk? So this as well as anybody. What you've got to do is you got to connect dots in that either teams that you have someone there that knows them, like Peters or D'Amico, or you've had a lot of dialogue in the past. In Pittsburgh, they said, they talked to Pittsburgh until they were blue in the face and almost got a deal done with Pittsburgh until the last minute when Kyle sprinted up the stairs. So why not make the first call to Pittsburgh? Because talk about desperate, and New England, same thing. New England's a desperate team that you talk to about Ayuk. I think they'll resume talks with those desperate wide receiver teams, because in New England and Pittsburgh's case for sure, they never solved those issues.